Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a gentle place where we quietly reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to soften suffering, calm the mind, and rediscover peace in every season of life. Dear friends, there comes a season of life after 60 when many people begin whispering the same quiet frustration late at night. Why can't I sleep anymore? At first it feels confusing, because the body feels tired, the day felt long, energy feels lower than before, and yet night arrives, the lights turn off, the house grows quiet, the body lies down, but somehow, the mind stays awake. Thoughts begin moving, memories return, worries quietly grow louder, and sleep feels farther away. Perhaps some people listening today understand this deeply. You lie in bed, eyes closed, wanting rest, needing rest, yet somehow the mind keeps wandering. Old conversations replay, health worries appear, family concerns return. Loneliness quietly feels louder. Regret arrives unexpectedly, and suddenly, hours pass, the clock feels slower. The night feels longer. Please hear this gently. You are not weak for struggling with sleep, you are not broken. And no, you are certainly not alone, because after 60, sleep often changes, the body changes, the nervous system changes, life changes, but dear friends, sometimes the thing quietly disturbing sleep is not only physical. Sometimes the mind has quietly been carrying too much into the night. Invisible things, emotional things, fear, worry, loneliness, overthinking, unspoken grief, old emotional pain. And because nighttime becomes quieter, the heart suddenly becomes louder. The Buddha gently understood this. He often taught, a restless mind struggles to find peace, and a mind carrying too much quietly struggles to rest. Not because someone failed, not because something is wrong, but because suffering often becomes louder in silence. Today, we are going to gently reflect on 7 quiet behaviors many people over 60 unknowingly continue doing, behaviors that quietly disturb sleep, interrupt peace, and leave the heart feeling emotionally tired. Not to blame ourselves, not to create fear, but to understand. Because understanding gently opens the door to healing. Together we will gently explore why overthinking becomes louder at night, how carrying emotional worry quietly interrupts sleep, why regret often returns after dark, how loneliness quietly disturbs emotional calm, why fear about aging and health quietly keeps the mind awake, and perhaps most importantly, how Buddha's wisdom gently teaches the heart to soften into rest. Please hear this gently. This reflection is not about forcing sleep sometimes. The harder we fight restlessness, the louder the mind becomes. Perhaps healing begins differently, more softly, more gently, because perhaps peaceful sleep after 60 begins not with controlling the mind. Perhaps it begins with caring for the mind, softening, breathing, carrying less into the night. The Buddha gently reminded people, peace begins where attachment softens, and perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may gently ask yourself, what has my mind been carrying into the dark? Because sometimes the body is tired, but the heart is still holding too much to fully rest. Dear friends, let us gently begin with the first silent behavior that quietly damages sleep after 60, something many people experience without even realizing how deeply it affects rest. And that behavior is overthinking late at night. Please hear this gently. Nighttime has a strange way of making thoughts feel louder. During the day, life distracts us. Errands, conversations, televisions, responsibilities, noise. But then evening comes. The house grows quieter. The world slows down. The lights dim, and suddenly the mind begins talking. Sometimes softly, sometimes endlessly. Perhaps some people listening today know this feeling deeply. You lie in bed, ready to rest, but somehow the mind begins replaying everything. Old conversations, family worries, health concerns, things left unfinished, mistakes from the past, imagined problems from the future, and suddenly sleep quietly slips farther away. Please hear this gently. Overthinking at night does not mean something is wrong with you. It often means the mind has simply been carrying too much quietly during the day. Because after 60, life often feels emotionally heavier. Health changes, family changes, retirement changes, routines, loneliness quietly grows, responsibilities shift, and somehow the mind quietly tries solving everything after dark, as though nighttime becomes the only moment the heart finally has space to speak. Today we gently reflect on something important. Why does overthinking quietly grow louder at night? The Buddha gently reminded people. A restless mind struggles to rest, not because the mind is broken, but because the mind naturally follows what it feels attached to. Fear, worry, regret, uncertainty. How often does this happen? The body lies safely in bed, yet the mind quietly whispers, what if my health gets worse? What if something happens to my family? What if I made mistakes? What if tomorrow becomes harder? And suddenly one thought becomes 10. 10 thoughts become 50. The heart feels restless, the body feels tense. Sleep quietly disappears. Dear friends, please hear this gently. The problem is not that you think. The problem is that the mind has never been taught how to gently set things down. Especially at night, especially after decades of responsibility. Many people after 60 quietly carry the emotional habit of preparing, solving, planning, protecting, and when the world finally becomes quiet, the mind keeps working. Emotionally healthy people slowly begin learning something gentle. Not every thought deserves attention at midnight. Imagine carrying heavy bags all day, then bringing them into bed with you. Worry, fear, regret, responsibility, unfinished thoughts. Of course, rest becomes harder. Dear friends, sometimes sleep struggles are not only physical. Sometimes, the heart quietly arrives at bedtime carrying too much. Please hear this gently. You do not have to solve tomorrow tonight. You do not have to relive yesterday before sleep. You do not have to mentally prepare for every possible fear, especially after 60, because rest matters deeply now. And perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may gently whisper, nothing needs solving right now. Tomorrow can wait. My heart deserves rest too. Because sometimes healing begins not by silencing the mind. Sometimes healing begins when we softly stop believing every worried thought. There was a woman named Barbara. She was 67 years old, living quietly in a small home outside Florida. If you asked Barbara how she was sleeping, she would usually laugh softly and say, "Oh, not great," then quickly add, "I guess that's just aging." But honestly, the nights had quietly become difficult, very difficult. Barbara often felt tired all day yet strangely awake at night. She would get into bed around 10, turn off the lights, close her eyes and wait, but somehow the mind refused to rest. At first, the thoughts felt small, simple, ordinary. Did I forget to call my daughter back? Should I schedule that doctor appointment? What if my blood pressure gets worse? Then slowly, the thoughts became heavier. Memories replayed. Old mistakes resurfaced, worries about money, worries about health, worries about her son's future, questions with no answers, and somehow the mind kept moving long after the body felt exhausted. Some nights Barbara checked the clock repeatedly, 11:15, 12:40, 3:18, and with every passing hour frustration quietly grew. Why can't I sleep? What's wrong with me? One morning during breakfast, her close friend Janet quietly asked, "You look tired." Barbara laughed softly. "Story of my life lately, not sleeping?" Barbara sighed. "No, my brain won't stop." Janet smiled gently. "What are you thinking about?" Barbara hesitated, then softly admitted, "Everything." The answer surprised even her because honestly, it felt true. Everything: the future, the past, family, health, money, loneliness, the strange uncertainty of getting older. Weeks later, at Janet's encouragement, Barbara reluctantly attended a mindfulness class at the community center. Normally, she never would have gone. Too quiet, too strange, too emotional, but quietly, something inside felt tired enough to try. One evening, the teacher softly said, "The mind often becomes loudest at night because silence finally gives suffering space to speak." Barbara sat very still. Then came another sentence, a sentence she later wrote on a sticky note beside her bed. "You do not have to solve tomorrow before sleep." Something softened, because suddenly, Barbara realized something painful. She had quietly spent years treating bedtime like problem-solving time, as though worrying more could somehow protect her future. But instead, it only exhausted her that night. Lying in bed, the worries came again. But this time, she tried something different. Instead of fighting the thoughts, she quietly whispered, "Not tonight. Tomorrow can wait." Then one slow breath, then another. Nothing dramatic happened. Sleep did not magically appear, but something softened the tension. The fear, the emotional urgency. Slowly, night after night, things began changing, not perfectly, not instantly. Just gently, she stopped watching stressful news before bed, turned off television earlier, took slower evening walks, practiced soft breathing, stopped arguing with sleeplessness, and little by little, the nights softened. Months later, Janet smiled over coffee one morning. "You seem more rested lately." Barbara laughed softly. "I think I finally stopped trying to solve my whole life at midnight, and somehow that changed everything." Dear friends, perhaps there is a Barbara somewhere inside many of us. Someone lying awake at night, someone quietly exhausted, someone whose mind refuses to stop carrying. Please hear this gently. You are not weak for overthinking. You are not failing. Your mind may simply be tired, emotionally tired, quietly overloaded, and perhaps healing begins not by forcing sleep. Perhaps healing begins by softening the emotional weight carried into the night. Perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may gently ask yourself, what am I trying to solve after dark? What fear can wait until morning? Because sometimes rest begins the moment the heart softly whispers, nothing needs fixing right now. I deserve peace too, dear friends. Let us gently move into the second silent behavior that quietly damages sleep after 60, something many people carry into bed without even realizing it. And that behavior is carrying emotional worry into bedtime. Please hear this gently. There is a difference between caring and carrying, especially at night. Many people after 60 spend the day worrying quietly. About family, about health, about money, about children, about grandchildren, about the future, about things they cannot fully control, and then evening arrives. The house grows quiet. The body lies down. But somehow the emotional carrying remains. The worries quietly follow into bed. Perhaps some people listening today understand this deeply. You lie down hoping to rest. Yet the mind whispers, I hope my daughter is okay. What if my health gets worse? What if something happens? What if life becomes harder? And suddenly the heart feels heavier. The body feels tense. Sleep quietly slips farther away. Please hear this gently. Worry often comes from love. Love for family. Love for safety. Love for what matters. But dear friends, love quietly becomes suffering when the heart never stops carrying. Especially after 60. When emotional energy becomes more precious. The Buddha gently reminded people, not everything belongs to us to carry. Not every outcome, not every future, not every fear, and perhaps, many people unknowingly take emotional heaviness into bed every night. Today we gently reflect on something important. What happens when worry quietly becomes a bedtime habit? The Buddha often taught the mind suffers when it grips too tightly, to fear, to uncertainty, to imagined futures, and dear friends. Nighttime often becomes the hour fear feels louder. Why? Because silence gives worry room to grow. The body becomes still, distractions disappear, and suddenly, the mind begins preparing for futures that have not happened. Some people quietly spend hours mentally protecting loved ones, imagining worst-case scenarios, trying to solve problems no one asked them to solve, trying to emotionally prepare for loss before loss even arrives. Please hear this gently. Caring is beautiful, but carrying endless worry quietly exhausts the nervous system, especially during sleep. Because the body rests best when the heart feels safe, and a worried heart rarely feels safe. Emotionally healthy people slowly begin learning something gentle. Concern belongs to the day, rest belongs to the night. Imagine bringing heavy bags into bed every evening. Family worry, health fear, financial stress, loneliness, uncertainty. Of course, sleep becomes harder, dear friends. Perhaps peaceful sleep after 60 is not only about the body. Perhaps it quietly asks something emotional too. What can I stop carrying tonight? Please hear this gently. You do not have to emotionally protect everyone while trying to sleep. You do not have to solve tomorrow before bed. You do not have to prepare for every fear, especially now, because rest matters deeply. And perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may softly whisper, the people I love are not safer because I worry all night. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight my heart deserves rest, because sometimes healing begins not by worrying less sometimes. Healing begins by carrying less into the dark. There was a man named Samuel. He was 71 years old, living quietly with his wife Margaret in a small town outside Arizona. For most of his life, Samuel had always been the protector, the planner, the dependable one. He worked hard, paid the bills, handled emergencies, solved problems, and even after retirement, something inside him never stopped watching for danger, especially when it came to family. His daughter, Melissa, was a single mother raising 2 children. His son, Brian, had recently changed careers, and though both children were doing all right, Samuel worried constantly, quietly, relentlessly. During the day, he mostly kept busy, but nighttime felt different, because somehow the worries grew louder after dark. He would lie in bed beside Margaret, the room quiet, the house still, yet his mind quietly whispered, what if Melissa is struggling financially? What if Brian made the wrong decision? What if something happens to the grandchildren? Then came the worries about himself, health, aging, retirement savings, future uncertainty. And suddenly sleep felt impossible. Some nights, he stared at the ceiling for hours, too tired to think clearly, too worried to rest. Margaret noticed first one evening while folding laundry. She softly asked, "You sleeping okay?" Samuel laughed quietly. "Not really. What's keeping you awake?" He hesitated, then softly admitted, everything. The answer surprised even him. Because honestly, it felt true. Everything. Family, money, health, the future, life itself. Margaret sat beside him, then gently asked, "Do you think worrying all night actually protects anyone?" The question lingered, because somehow he had never asked himself that before. Weeks later, at the encouragement of a friend, Samuel reluctantly joined a mindfulness discussion group for older adults. Normally, he never would have gone. Too personal, too emotional, too uncomfortable, but quietly, something inside felt tired enough to try. One evening, the teacher softly said, "Many loving people quietly mistake worry for protection." Samuel sat very still. Then came another sentence, a sentence that somehow landed directly in his chest. "The people you love are not safer because you suffer all night." Silence. Then the teacher added gently, "A tired heart cannot protect anyone well." Something softened immediately, because suddenly Samuel realized something painful. He had quietly spent years believing worry was responsibility, as though sleepless nights somehow proved love. But instead, the worry had quietly exhausted him. That night, lying in bed, the familiar worries returned. But this time he tried something different. He quietly whispered, "I care deeply, but tonight I cannot carry everyone." Then one slow breath, then another. Nothing dramatic happened. Sleep did not suddenly become perfect, but something softened. The emotional gripping, the tension, the urgency. Slowly, things changed, not perfectly, not instantly, just gently. He worried less after dark, walked more in the mornings, talked more honestly with Margaret, trusted life a little more, and little by little sleep slowly returned. Months later, Margaret smiled one morning over coffee. "You seem more rested lately." Samuel laughed softly. "I think I finally stopped treating bedtime like emotional work." Then after a pause, he quietly added, "And maybe I finally let myself rest too, dear friends." Perhaps there is a Samuel somewhere inside many of us. Someone quietly carrying worry into bed every night. Someone mistaking sleeplessness for caring. Please hear this gently. Love does not require suffering through the night. You are allowed rest. You are allowed softness. You are allowed, especially after 60, because, dear friends, the people you love are not safer because you stay awake worrying. Perhaps tonight you may gently ask yourself, what worry have I been carrying into the dark? What fear can wait until morning? Because sometimes healing begins the moment the heart softly whispers, "Tonight I deserve rest too." If today's reflection touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if worry has quietly followed you into the night too, perhaps gently leave a comment below. Sometimes healing begins when we realize many hearts quietly carry more than they need to after dark. Dear friends, let us gently move into the third silent behavior that quietly damages sleep after 60. Something many people revisit in the dark without even realizing how deeply it affects rest. And that behavior is holding on to old regret before sleep. Please hear this gently. Nighttime has a strange way of reopening old memories. The world grows quiet, the house becomes still, and suddenly the mind wanders backward. Old conversations, old mistakes, things left unsaid, relationships that changed, choices we wish had gone differently. Perhaps some people listening today understand this deeply. You lie down hoping for rest, yet somehow the past quietly enters the room. The mind whispers, "I should have done more. Why did I say that? What if I had chosen differently? Did I fail someone I loved?" And suddenly the heart feels heavier, the chest feels tighter, sleep quietly moves farther away. Please hear this gently. Regret after 60 is deeply human, especially later in life, because aging naturally brings reflection. The mind revisits the road already traveled, the things done well, the things wished differently, and sometimes without realizing it. People quietly turn bedtime into judgment time, as though the quiet of night becomes a courtroom inside the heart. Today we gently reflect on something important. Why does regret feel louder after dark? The Buddha gently reminded people, suffering grows where the mind clings too tightly, especially to things no longer changeable. How often does this happen? The body lies safely in bed, yet the mind quietly returns years backward. Old parenting mistakes, lost relationships, missed opportunities, moments of anger, moments of silence, moments wished differently. And somehow the heart quietly punishes itself. Night after night, please hear this gently. Reflection can be wise, reflection can help us grow, but endless emotional replay quietly exhausts the spirit, especially at bedtime. Because, dear friends, sleep asks for softness, not judgment. The nervous system rests best when the heart feels safe, and a heart constantly reliving regret rarely feels safe. The Buddha never taught punishment. He taught awareness, compassion, gentleness, because perhaps the younger version of yourself was doing the best they knew how to do, imperfectly, humanly, trying, struggling, learning. Emotionally healthy people slowly begin learning something healing. The night is not for punishment, the night is for rest. Imagine carrying old photographs into bed every night, not to remember gently but to reopen pain, to relive mistakes, to punish yourself. Of course rest becomes harder, dear friends. Perhaps peaceful sleep after 60 quietly asks something softer. Can I stop reliving what cannot be rewritten? Please hear this gently. You do not need to solve old regret at midnight. You do not need to retry your whole life after dark. You are allowed compassion. Especially now, because rest matters deeply, and perhaps tonight, before sleep you may softly whisper, "I was imperfect, but I was trying. Tonight I choose rest over regret," because sometimes healing begins not when the past disappears. Sometimes healing begins when the heart softly stops putting itself on trial at night. There was a woman named Evelyn. She was 69 years old, living quietly in a small town outside North Carolina for most of her life. Evelyn had been the dependable one, a devoted mother, a caring wife, a hard worker, the person others leaned on. From the outside, her life looked steady, peaceful even, but quietly. Nighttime had become difficult, very difficult, not because of noise, not because of health problems, but because of memories. Every evening, the same pattern quietly returned. She turned off the lights, climbed into bed, closed her eyes, and somehow the mind wandered backward, especially toward one chapter of life she never stopped replaying. Her relationship with her son, Matthew, years earlier. When Matthew was a teenager, their relationship had been difficult. Arguments, distance, misunderstanding, stress. At the time, Evelyn had been overwhelmed, working long hours, helping care for her sick mother, trying to hold everything together. And though she loved Matthew deeply, she often felt impatient, emotionally exhausted, sometimes distant now. Years later, Matthew was doing well, married, successful, kind. Their relationship had healed in many ways, yet strangely, Evelyn still replayed old guilt at night. The moment she lost patience, the time she raised her voice, the afternoons she was too tired to listen. Some nights, she quietly whispered into the dark, "I should have been better." And somehow the guilt always felt loudest at bedtime. One afternoon while visiting, Matthew noticed she seemed tired. "You sleeping okay, Mom?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Not really." "What is going on?" She hesitated, then quietly admitted, "I think about when you were younger." Matthew looked confused. "What about it?" Evelyn sighed. I wish I had done better. The room became quiet. Then unexpectedly, Matthew laughed softly. Mom, you know what I remember? What you always showed up. The sentence surprised her because somehow she had spent years replaying mistakes while forgetting the love that had always been there. Weeks later, at a mindfulness class for older adults, the teacher softly said, "The heart often becomes cruelest to itself at night." Evelyn sat very still. Then came another sentence, a sentence she later wrote beside her bedside lamp. Regret teaches best when wrapped in compassion. Something softened, because suddenly, she realized something painful. She had quietly spent years turning bedtime into punishment, replaying guilt, judging herself, forgetting context, forgetting exhaustion, forgetting humanity. Then the teacher gently added, "The younger version of you was surviving too." The words landed deeply, because honestly, she had forgotten that. The younger Evelyn had struggled too, had worried too, had loved imperfectly like every human being that night. Lying quietly in bed, the familiar guilt returned. But this time she whispered something softer. I was imperfect, pause. But I loved deeply then, quietly, and I deserve rest too. Nothing dramatic happened. Sleep did not magically become perfect. But something softened the judgment, the shame, the emotional heaviness. Slowly, night after night, things changed, not instantly, not perfectly, just gently. She stopped replaying old mistakes before bed, practiced gratitude, spoke more kindly to herself, allowed memory without punishment, and little by little sleep slowly softened. Months later, Matthew smiled one afternoon while helping in the garden. You seem happier lately. Evelyn laughed softly. I think I finally stopped putting myself on trial every night, then quietly added, and somehow that helped me sleep again. Dear friends, perhaps there is an Evelyn somewhere inside many of us. Someone quietly reliving old regret before sleep. Someone judging themselves long after the moment has passed. Please hear this gently. You are not your worst moment. You are not your hardest season. You are not every mistake you made while trying to survive life, especially after 60. Because, dear friends, nighttime was never meant to become punishment. Nighttime was meant for rest. Perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may gently ask yourself, what regret keeps visiting me after dark? Can I offer compassion to the person I used to be? Because sometimes healing begins the moment the heart softly whispers, I was human, and tonight I choose rest. Dear friends, as we gently come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the quiet truth resting underneath everything we explored is this. Peaceful sleep after 60 is not only about the body sometimes. Sleep quietly struggles because the heart has been carrying too much worry, too much overthinking, too much regret, too much loneliness, too much invisible emotional heaviness, and somehow night becomes the hour everything grows louder. Today we gently reflected on silent behaviors that quietly disturb sleep after 60. Overthinking late at night, carrying emotional worry into bed, reliving old regret before sleep, loneliness quietly disrupting emotional calm, fear about health, aging, and uncertainty, the habit of filling silence to avoid inner discomfort, and perhaps trying too hard to force sleep itself, not because anyone is weak, not because something is wrong, but because the heart quietly grows tired after carrying life for so long. Please hear this gently. You have carried much, more than many people see. The worries, the responsibilities, the grief, the disappointments, the quiet fears, the invisible emotional labor of loving others for decades. And dear friends, perhaps this season of life quietly asks something softer. Not, why can I sleep, but gently, what has my heart been carrying into the night? Because sometimes the body is tired, but the heart is still holding too tightly. The Buddha gently reminded people, a restless mind struggles to find peace. Not because peace is impossible, but because peace often asks for softness. Softness toward fear, softness toward regret, softness toward uncertainty, softness toward ourselves. And perhaps healing sleep after 60 begins not by forcing the mind silent. Perhaps it begins by caring for the mind more gently, less emotional carrying, less midnight problem solving, less punishment, less fear, little by little, night by night, breath by breath. Please hear this gently. You do not need to solve tomorrow before bed. You do not need to relive yesterday in the dark. You do not need to protect everyone while lying awake, especially now. Because rest matters deeply, peace matters deeply, and your tired heart matters too, perhaps tonight. Before sleep, you may place a hand gently over your heart, take one slow breath, and quietly whisper, "Nothing needs fixing right now. Tomorrow can wait. My heart deserves rest too." Because sometimes healing begins not when sleep becomes perfect sometimes. Healing begins the moment we stop fighting ourselves in the dark. If today's reflection brought even a small sense of comfort, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if sleep has quietly felt difficult lately, perhaps gently share it in the comments. Sometimes healing begins the moment we realize many hearts quietly struggle through long nights too. May your thoughts grow quieter, may your heart feel softer, and may peaceful rest gently find its way back to you, one calm breath at a time.